Yeah, wax on the wall, I'll go.
Yeah, let's use the walls.
Yeah.
Just while we're waiting, just make sure that you've done the prerequisites. So that's installing Node.js and Visual Studio Code, and optionally Git and GitHub. Okay, sweet. I guess we can get started now. So welcome everyone to the web development workshop. We'll learn the basics of React, Node.js, which will serve as our backend, and maybe if we have time, we'll go through Socketio. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the sponsors. That's Potentia, Centrality, FNZ, Zero, Serato, Optober, and Atlassian. And if you do ever get behind in this workshop, just know that there is documentation on our GitHub page. So this is the web development workshop GitHub page, and then if you go down, all the steps is labeled here. So if you ever get behind, just follow that. So we have assumed that you guys have done the prerequisites. That's installing Node.js as well as Visual Studio Code. And also optionally Git and GitHub. And that will be used to either retrieve the changes that we made throughout the workshop or if you want to upload your code later, then you can do that. So the project we'll be creating today is a web app that allows people to vote on a list of options for a question that you specify. For instance, if you want to make a poll on where to eat today, then you can do that, and then you can have a list of options like KFC or Macca's or BK, and then people can vote on it. So just a small demo. This is the end product, I guess, type of question, so it could be where to eat. And the option could be Macca's, BK. And create a poll, and then you get back a code, which you can use to go to the voting page by filling out the code. And then you can swipe left or right. And then it will update here. So yeah, so it's a pretty simple app. It'll take us the whole of the 2 hours to make. And yeah, we'll get started. And the first thing we'll do is set up our project structure and then run this command. And we'll explain what this command does later, but this command takes a while to run. So we'll just do that initially and then explain it. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, create a new folder. So File, Open Folder. Just make a new folder here. Call it whatever you want. So Swipe App. Oh, Jesus. Swiper. And then just press Select Folder to open it up on Visual Studio Code. And now you would want to open a terminal. So let's go to this terminal button up here and press New Terminal. And this will open up the terminal to the right directory, so the folder we just made. And then we'll run that command that we just showed on the slide. So it's npx create React app, and then the name of our app, we'll call it front end. And then I'll press enter. And this command takes a while to run, so I'll just go back to my slides. See, if you guys didn't get that command, it's right here. Cool. And then we'll learn the basics of React. So React is a JavaScript library that is used to create user interfaces. So the user interface we'll be creating is a website, but it could be used for mobile development or desktop app development. And the reason why we use it is because it's quite simple compared to other JavaScript frameworks, and also it's used in a lot of places. So a lot of companies are looking for React developers, so it's a good skill to have. The main idea of React is that you split up your website into different parts or components, and then you, I guess, work on them independently, and then you just build out your website from there. So this is the command we just did, npx create React app, and that will pretty much create the starter template for us. So that'll do majority of the boring stuff, such as setting up a development environment, as well as setting up some scripts for us to use for starting that development environment, for building our website, and for running test cases and the such. And we'll move on to the first part of React, which is components. And you can think of components as the building blocks of your website. So just as an example, to demonstrate this, why we need components, here is, oh no, the resolution is. So here is a normal HTML website. It has a header, a body, and some content inside. And if you wanted to reuse this header part of this website in a different page, then you would have to manually copy and paste this header tag and everything inside it onto that other page. And suppose you have like 10 different pages, then you would have to copy it 10 different times. If you want to change something, then you have to go through those 10 pages and change them. And that is quite tedious, and so that is what components aim to solve. They allow you to describe a part of the page in one place and then keep reusing that bit of code just like any other HTML tag. So you can think of them as a custom HTML element. And we'll go through an example to clarify this. So they act like JavaScript functions. They take an input called props, which we'll get into, and they return something called JSX, which for now you can think of as enhanced HTML. So as an example, if you want to create a component for our header, so a custom header component, we first create a file called header.js. We create a function that represents our component, and then we return something that looks like HTML. But this isn't HTML, it's JSX. And we'll go through the differences a bit, I think, on the next slide. And so this is a component. It returns some JSX. And then if we want to use this component in another place, we first export it. So export default header. This will export our header component for use. And then in another file, such as app.js, we can import that header and use it like any other HTML tag, like so. So just a bit about this JSX thing. It looks like HTML, but you can do like more stuff with it. For instance, you can put JavaScript expressions inside it using the curly braces. So for instance, in this example, we have the variable x with the string hello world, and we can embed that variable, the value of that variable, inside our JSX. And that's using these curly braces. And this will return a paragraph tag with hello world inside. So let's create our first component. Oh no, create reactive still going. Oh, no, it's finished. Sweet. So the first thing we'll do is we'll copy these commands to start our website in development mode. So let's do that. cd frontend, and then npm start. And while that's being done, let's look through the different folders that Create React App has made for us. So we have a package.json file. This will specify our dependencies of this project. So for instance, we have the dependency on React, React DOM, as well as a bunch of scripts, which are commands that you can run, which will do certain things. For instance, the start command we just ran runs the website in development mode. Every time we make changes to the source folder, it will automatically reload. So that's useful. The build command will let us build our website. So that's for deployment. Test is to run test cases. We won't get into that. And eject you can ignore. So we will write all of our components inside this source folder. This is where all of our source files will live. So let's look at app.js, for instance. This is a component. It is a function that returns some JSX. And this is actually the component that is shown on the screen when we first load our website. So if I were to go back, you'll see an initial website here created by Create React App. It has a spinning logo, has some text, and says Learn React. And this is exactly what is described here. A logo, then says Learn React below here. So we'll delete this because we don't actually need it. We'll show our own page here. Let's delete it and just replace it with an empty div tag. And then let's create our first component. And it's going to be the home page component. So let's create a new folder to hold all of these page components. We'll call it page. Inside this, we'll create another folder to hold our home page component. So new folder, home. And finally, inside this home folder, we'll create a new file called home.js. And this will hold our home page component. So just like we learned before, we'll write function, home, that returns some JSX. Let's return an empty div with hello, this is home in it. And then we want to use this component elsewhere, so we'll export it. So export default home. And then, for instance, if I want to use this in our app to actually show it on our page, we can, well, first of all, let's delete these import statements. And let's import home from, and then this is the path to the home file. So in our case, it will be inside the page folder, then the home folder, and the home.js. So it'll be page/home/home. And you can write home.js, but you can omit the .js part. And let's use our component. So we can write just like any other HTML tag, open angle brackets, component name, and then immediately close it. And so if you want to move this into different lines, you simply surround it by parentheses, and then you can start formatting it on different lines, like so. And we can show this page here. So create React app automatically reloads the page for us. So yeah, this is hello, this is home. And let's start working on our component. So the first thing we're going to have is a heading, and we'll just call it swipe app, like so. We also want a input box, but this is where the user will input the question. Another input box, this was where the user is going to input the option. A button, which just says add. And another button, which says, I believe it was create poll. Sweet. And then we go back, everything shows up. Sweet. And the next thing we're going to do is create another component. And the reason for this is because both of these input tags will share pretty much the same code. So it would be great to make, reuse a component for the input tag. So we'll create our custom input component. So let's right-click our source folder, create a new folder called components. And inside this, we'll create a file called input.js. The reason why I'm putting this in a different folder is because, well, I want this clean separation of what's a page component and what's a component that I use in a page. But all of this is just convention. If you really wanted, you could have all of these components on the top level. This is just to clean up, to make everything look organized. So just like we've learned, let's write a function called input, and then return some JSX. In our case, it will return simply the input tag. So now this seems pretty useless at this point, but as we build on this component, it becomes a bit bigger. So we'll export it. And then we can start using this component. So let's go back to home. We'll import input from, and then try find it. So it's 2 directories up, and then inside the components folder, so /components/input. And then we have imported our input component, and we can just replace that with our custom input component. Now, I want to say that this does not change any of the functionality, because all we've done is create an input component that returns just a simple input tag. So this will have the same exact functionality, but just using our custom input element component. Sweet. So if I were to go back, you'll see, well, nothing's changed. It's still our swipe app. So I'll go back to my slides and go through the next thing, which is props or properties. And props are simply inputs or data that you want to pass into your component. So for instance, you would want to pass in a class name or some data that you fetch from an API. So you can do that all with props. And you pass in these props just like how you'd pass in attributes in HTML. So as an example, here we have a header component, and we pass in 2 props, data with the value hey, and another data with the value world. And then to use these props, these inputs, you simply access the object that is automatically passed in by React. So as an example, we create a parameter called props. By convention, it's called props. You can name it whatever you want. And simply access data. And that will give you back hey, and dot another data. And that gives you back world. So as another example, here I have a component called component that returns an empty div. And I want to pass in some props into this, some input. So this is how I normally use that component. If I want to pass in props, data, and name, then you simply data equals yo-yo, name is Alan. And React will take these props, put it into a JavaScript object, like so, and then you can access this JavaScript object by creating first a parameter, and then within curly braces, because this is an expression, you can put props.data, props.name. And this will return a div with yo-yo, and then a colon, and then Alan. Yeah. So let's create a component that uses props. So in our case, we want to have some placeholder text in our input boxes. And we can do that by passing in a prop. So let's write placeholder is equal to, for instance, please enter a question. And the same thing for our second thing, but for option. And then we can access those props in our input component by saying, by creating parameter props, and then setting the placeholder attribute in JSX to whatever we passed in. So props.placeholder. And if I go back to our page, it'll show up with some placeholder text. Cool. And so the next thing we're going to do is render out or show a list of options. So for now, we don't want to focus on the functionality on how we add those options. But say you have the options Macca's, a BK, and Wendy's, just like what I did in the beginning. And I want to show each of these options on the page as a list item. And the way you would do that is using a special function called map. So I'll just go through the slides with this. So you can render lists of items with this map function. And the map function will create a new list of items based on a function that we give to transform each of the elements. So this is pretty abstract, so we'll go through an example. So for instance, if we have this list containing numbers 1 and 2, a function that takes in a number n and returns a paragraph tag with that number n in it. And then once we call the map function, it will go through each element of the list, starting with 1, call that function, which will return a paragraph tag with 1 inside, and put it in the final list. And then it does the same thing for the second element of the list, so 2, I'll call that function, which returns a paragraph tag with 2 in it. And so this is our final list. So that's what map does. It transforms one list to another using a function, or it maps items to another. Cool. So let's actually use the map function here to convert this list of items to a bunch of list items. So below this add button, we'll write curly braces because we want to embed a JavaScript expression in here, our map function. We'll write options, which is our list, .map, and we'll provide a function. So this function will go through each option, O, and return a list item with O embedded inside it. So within curly braces, O. Sweet. Let's save the page. Come back. You'll see our list items have showed up. Sweet. So that is how we map lists of items. Cool. The next thing we're going to learn about is conditional rendering. So it's often a task that you would want to show one element if a condition is true and another element if a condition is false. So we can do that using the ternary operator. Now, if you haven't seen the ternary operator before, I will just go through an example. So for instance, if the length of the list is 0, then we will render out or show what's between this question mark and this colon. So it will show a paragraph tag saying list is empty. Now, if the list is not equal to 0, so this condition is false, it will show what's after this colon. So list is not empty. So for example, if you have a list of items with something inside it, it will return list is not empty, and if it's empty, it will write list is empty, because it checks that condition and returns the correct expression. So a note is that you cannot use if statements within JSX because they're not expressions, they're statements. So expressions are something that evaluates to a value. So a ternary operator either evaluates to that JSX tag or this one, so you can use them. So as an example, we want to show a text saying, oh, no options if this list is empty. So let's do that. Let's make some space for us. We write options.length is equal to 0. So if the options array is empty, we will return a paragraph tag saying no options. Otherwise, we write a colon. Otherwise, we return this list of list items. Okay. Let's save this. Go back. You'll see that since the list is not empty, it will show those list items. If I do delete everything in this list, which will make the list length 0, it will show no options. Cool. Right. So one thing that I forgot to mention about this map function is that if I go to the console, it will show a warning saying each child in the list should have a unique key prop. So we learned about props. And so React expects this key property to be given if we render out a list of items. And this key property should be something that is unique with each item in the list. So the only thing we have that could be unique is each option. So each option is unique in this list. We assume that. And so we can pass that as a prop. So key is equal to, within curly braces, O. So we're just passing in the specific option we have as a key. Now that's something that the browser and React just requires. If I go back, refresh the page, the warning goes away. Sweet. Cool. The next thing we'll cover is state, which is probably the most important part about React. It's what allows React to be, reactive. So a state variable is simply a special variable such that when you change it using a special function, it will cause the component to update itself, or in React terms, re-render. So for instance, if we want to track what the user has inputted into that question box, then we can do so with a state variable. So you can create a state variable using this function, the useState function, and it takes in a parameter for the initial state. So initially, the user wouldn't have typed anything inside that question box, so it'll be an empty string. And then the useState function returns two things. It returns the state variable that you can use in your JSX or wherever, and a function to change the state variable. And it's important that you use the function to change it, because otherwise React won't know to update. So here's an example. If we want to track what the question was that they inputted into that input box, we can do so using a state variable. So it returns question and set question. And note the square brackets, we need those. And yeah. Now it's important that we use this set question function. And we can't just simply write question is equal to what to eat. It won't work. So you must call set question what to eat. So let's create our first state variable. And we will track what the user has typed inside this question input and also inside this option input. So we write const, and then within square brackets, question, and then set question is equal to useState, and then empty quotes, because initially the state is empty. And then if you go into the console, you'll see an error saying useState is not defined. And that's because we have to import it from the React library. So we can simply do that by import. And then within curly braces, we write use state. So we're importing the use state function from React. And we'll make the same state variable, but this time to track what the option was inputted. So option, set option, use state. Initially, it was an empty string. And now we want to pass in both of these values, the state variable and the function to change the state variable, as a prop to this custom input component we made. We'll call this prop value because it's kind of a generic property since we want to reuse it, so we just can't call it question. So for instance, value is question and then value is option. And then we also want to pass in the function to change the state variable. Set value like so. So just to summarize, we just made two state variables, question and option. And the whole point of them is to try track what the user has typed in as an input. And so we need to use these prop values inside our custom input component. And we'll do that by setting the value of this input, value to, well, the prop value that was passed in, so props.value. And we'll also pass in an handler, so a function handler, to respond to a change event. So a change event is called every single time the user types something in the keyboard. So we provide a function that takes in that change event and do something with it. So JavaScript will provide a parameter called e, and we can use this parameter e to get what the user has typed. So using this event, we will set the value, our state variable, to e.target.value. And this e.target.value thing is what the user has typed. Oh, this is actually props.setValue because we passed it in as a prop. So just to summarize, every time the user types in something, it will call this function. And this function will set the value to what the user has typed, so e.target.value. And so then React will update the state. It will cause the component to re-render. And we will, well, when we go back, we'll actually see nothing. So no functionality has actually changed. But now we have a variable that tracks what the user has typed. So if you go here, below the button, we can actually use the state variable we just created. We can embed it just like any other variable. So we can embed it within header tags. If we go back, type in a question, it automatically updates. Okay, so there's one more thing we need to do. Every time the user types in an option and presses the button add, we would like to update this options list. And every time, like as a rule of thumb, every time we need something to happen and change in response to an event, we need to create a state variable. So let's create a state variable that holds the options. Let's actually reuse this variable. Options, set options. And this is going to be a state variable representing what options the user has typed and pressed added on. And we'll wrap this around the use state. And the initial options is obviously an empty list. Oops. Because initially the user hasn't typed any options in. Cool. And so we will set up a handler for the onClick event. So just like the onChange event, there is a handler, there is a property called onClick. And JavaScript will call this, or I guess the runtime will call this every single time the user clicks on that button. And we provide a function to respond to that. And so every time the user clicks the add button, we would like to set options to the current options plus the option that the user inputted concatenated. So we want to add something to that array, to the options array. So we can do this by options.concat and the option that the user has typed in. So just to summarize, we have provided a function that responds to click events. And all it does is that it firstly appends what the user has typed into the options array, returns a new list from that, and sets the options to that new array. And so now, if I go back, type in an option, or initially it says no options, and I type in an option and press add, it will show that option we just added. And if I do another one, React will re-render and show that new option. Cool. That is, I think, our first component done. And obviously, it looks a bit different from the demo I showed you. And that's because it's missing, well, all of the styling. And because the styling will take so long to explain, I'll copy majority of the styling from the documentation. And yeah, we'll set the appropriate selectors. So right-click our home folder, new file, home.css. And this is where we're going to write our styling. So the styling for this page. And we'll import this CSS file to apply it to this page. So import./home.css. And we'll copy the styling from our documentation. And the reason for that is this isn't probably what this is what you're not interested in, so we'll just skip over this styling part. So just like, as you may know, CSS applies styles on a selector, and all of these selectors are class names. So we'll have to put the appropriate class names in our JSX. So for instance, we want to apply this styling to our top level div. And to do that, we write class name is equal to home container. And this will apply this styling to this div. And we want to do this for, well, each of the elements, right? Or each one class name. So this is the first heading. I'll find that as a heading. Set a class name property to our input, custom input component. This one is the question input. This one is our option input. This is our add button. This li thing here is our list item. So this is this styling. So we'll set that. And this is the create button. So we have applied some styling on each of the elements using our CSS file and applying the correct class name. Now, one thing we have to do is actually use this new property we made on our input component. So this is something we made, so we have to actually handle this case that we pass in a class name. We go back to our input component, we'll set the class name to what the user has passed in as a prop. So props.className. If I go back to our website, you can see some styling applied. Now it doesn't look exactly what the demo showed, and that's because I forgot a div tag. So we'll create a new div tag here, and we'll wrap everything starting from input to this ending button inside that div tag. So we'll close it at the end, and then we'll indent everything one level. We'll save that, and then yeah, so that's what is shown on the demo. Sweet. So that is our first component homepage done, and then we'll move on to our other pages. Now, the next page we'll work on is our voting page component. So we create a new folder for that called vote, and we'll create a vote.js file. And we write, just like we've done before, function vote that represents our vote component. It will return some JSX. In this case, we'll just return vote. And then we'll export our vote component. And if I go back to our page, you'll see that it still shows our home component. And that's because we actually haven't used this anywhere. So let's go back to app.js and show it. So we'll import that vote component that we just made, like so, and start using it. So we just replace that with vote. Sweet, and the text vote comes up. So let's start adding stuff to our vote page. So the first thing we'll add is a message saying please swipe left for no and right for yes. Again, we need to use the parentheses if we want to move it to different lines. And then we want to show our question. I have some dummy text for that. Now, this question will be provided by the server. And we actually haven't created the server yet, so we're just going to create a dummy variable representing the question. So we write const question, and for instance, where to eat. And we'll embed that variable inside this tag. Cool. Now the next thing we need is our swipeable cards. And before that, we need to create a list of options for those swipeable cards to show. So write const options. And this is just a dummy list. We'll get this information from the server. So the options could be Macca's, BK, and Wendy's. Cool. And now we need to create those swipeable cards. Now, unfortunately, those swipeable cards is like a really complicated component. And there's no way that we're going to complete that component in time. But thankfully for us, another person on the internet has created that component for us. And this is a common practice in React, just using other people's components. For instance, there's whole libraries out there where we can just install other people's components and use them, such as Material UI, Ant Design. There's heaps of them out there. You can just Google them. In this workshop, we'll use this Tinder card component that another person has made. And you can find these components in this file, website, npm.js. Now, it's to be noted that this file contains other JavaScript packages that might not be components. So, yeah. So here is the component we will install. The package is called React Tinder Card, and it has exactly the functionality we need. And in the documentation, it shows a bunch of props that it accepts, so a bunch of input that it accepts. So it has a couple of properties such as onCard left screen, where you specify a function that will be called after the card has left the screen. A prop called prevent swipe, where you provide an array of directions, so up and down, that we don't want the user to swipe in. So let's actually use this package in our project. So to do that, we'll copy this command, npm I react Tinder card, and let's install this in our project. So we will open a new terminal, make sure you're in the right directory, so it's in the front end folder, and then we'll write npm install react Tinder card. Now the npm install and I are the same thing, so you could use either. I think it's react Tinder card. Yeah, react Tinder card. And we press enter. And once it's done installing, we can simply use that component in our project. So just going through the documentation, they even give back an example of how to use it. Yeah. Now, if you get an error in this while you're installing, and it says that there's a dependency conflict, then simply specify a legacy, legacy, okay. Wait up. Legacy peer DEVS. Now that's because I think one of the versions of NPM has a more strict dependency package system, so you need to specify that. But if you're using the most stable release, then you shouldn't encounter that problem. So let's import that component. So import Tinder card from React Tinder card. So this is just like the example, and we can start using it. So we want to go through each of these options and then show a Tinder card. So we can do that using the map function. So options.map. And for each option O, we want to show a Tinder card. And within the Tinder card, we want to show, well, the text, Macca's, BK, or Wendy's. Sweet. So if I go back, you'll see that, well, these are Tinder cards. Well, they don't look like it, but we can swipe them. And yeah, they're a bit glitchy. So we just need to style them now. One thing we forgot is that we need to provide a key. So every time, as a rule of thumb, every time you use this map function, you need to provide a key to whatever renders or shows. And we provide the key as just the option that's passed in. And yeah. So now we can style it. Again, I'll copy and paste the styling and apply the appropriate class names, because otherwise it'd take too long. So new file, vote.css, and we'll copy that. Cool. So I'll first import that CSS file. I'll drag it to one side so I can see the class names that I have to apply. Now, if anyone's interested in what the CSS does, they can simply ask me afterwards. Yeah. So this is the vote container. And this card container will be a div that I'll create now, and it will contain all of the Tinder cards. That's why I call it a card container. So I'll just nest this, and I'll set this class name to card container. And for the Tinder card, I'll do the same thing. I'll set the class name to card. And yeah. So we've just applied some styling by choosing the correct class name as the CSS file. So if I go back to our React project, you'll see our page. See something overflowing? That's because these cards are pretty big. To change it, this would be 100%. Sweet. So, but they do work. They swipe, just like what we want. Cool. And now we'll quickly make our last component, which is the summary page. So we'll right-click a folder, and I'm going to do this one quickly because we've already gone through pretty much the fundamentals of React. It's only like 2 things that you have to know: props and state, as well as what a component is. And so we'll quickly make this one. So summary.js, another one called summary.css. Now this JS file, again, function, summary, representing a component that returns some JSX. And we'll export this. And we'll show it on our app page. So we'll import it. And then show it on the page. And if I go back to my app page, it'll show nothing on the screen because I've returned an empty div. Cool. In the summary page, we will show the code. And for now, we don't know the code. We'll get it from the server, which we'll eventually create in the second part. So I'll just put some dummy text. We also show the question. I'll remember the parentheses to move them into a different line. Again, we'll get the question from the server and a list of options. Now, these list of options needs to have the number of votes with them. So we'll create a dummy variable to hold that. So const options. And since we need the number of votes, we'll store it all in an object. So for instance, and then have the key property to specify what option it was, so macas, and votes, which is the number of votes. And then we'll change this to BK. I'll just duplicate it 3 times. And then I'll use the map function again to map each of these items to a list item. So I'll write it within UL tags, and then I'll open up curly braces. And then I'll do options.map. We're going through each option, providing a function that transforms an option to a list item. It's a list item. And inside this list item, I want to pass in o.name, so the name property, as well as the number of votes. So within curly braces, o.votes. Votes. And we also need to pass in a key because we're using the function map function. And this will just be o.name, the name of the option. If I go back, it will show, well, what we want, which is the list of options as well as the number of votes they got. Cool. And the last thing we have to do is style this page. And then we'll take a break where you guys can catch up and stuff. So I know I'm going through this extremely fast. That's because there's a whole backend component to this workshop that we'll get through. But there are people willing to help, so feel free to ask any of the devs members here. I'm pretty sure they're proficient with React. So as we've done before, we'll set the respective class names. So class name is equal to summary container. And for this list item, we'll set it to list item. If I go back, I broke the page. Oh. Well, one thing is that I haven't imported the CSS file. So import ./summary.css. And cool. So everything shows up. And yeah, so that is all of our 3 pages done. And yeah, so it took quite a while to get through the 3 pages. And yeah, that's the end of the front end part. If you have any questions, I'll come around. So yeah, this is a 5-minute break. In the meantime, I'll put up a question. And if you do answer this question well, correctly, then you will receive a DEVS shirt. So the question is, what will happen if I click on this button here? Sweet. So it's like a 5-minute break. Sorry, what?
Becomes count 1?
No, that's incorrect. Sorry. Yep. Nothing will happen. Why? Now you need to answer why to get the. Yeah. I set a 0 here. No, this is the initial state. So why isn't this working? Yeah.
So we're not using the set count.
Yeah, that's correct. So every single time we have to update the state, we have to use this function, set count. As I said in one of the slides, you cannot manually change count because that doesn't trigger a re-render. So it doesn't update the page. So no matter how many times I click it, it won't update. So I think one of the members of DEVS will get your name and give you a shirt. So if I set this count to count +1, which will have the same exact, logic, but this time React knows about it and it will re-render the page. So if I click count, it will keep setting the count up. Sweet. Yeah, so we'll start again soon. I'll come around if you guys have questions.
It's making no difference. Source is lectern computer. Is this muted?
I think that mutes the recording or something.
pushed it to master, so it may.
Oh, okay. Should be fine.
Yeah, so we'll be on a different environment.
That was. I'll just push it to.
This mode.
Yeah.
It's on master.
They're unrelated. That's fine. I'll just do the other one.
Oh, just still play it.
It won't work because the merge doesn't work. So I'll just change the branches. I don't have this password. Wow. Okay, I'll just skip it.
Oh, you can do it. I think you click security, that's why.
Oh, really?
Try branches. I think you went manage access, that's why.
Don't spot it. Hey guys, sorry for the technical difficulty, but we've managed to push our code onto our GitHub page. So your GitHub repo, so you'll be able to find our front-end part inside the front-end folder. So for anyone who didn't catch up, feel free to go on the front-end, I'll go on the GitHub repo to download our current front-end. If you guys can't find our GitHub repo, feel free to ask any div members where it is. Cool. Welcome back. I wish everyone had a great 5 minutes break. We're going to move on to the next section. Let me just check. Yep. So we're going to introduce React routers to our application. Right now, you'll see how our current app has a bunch of let me just, hey, that's weird. Huh, interesting. Git checkout master. Cool, here's our code, great. So in our homepage, no, in our index or app, I believe it's app, we notice how our current home only has a single page where we have to manually change our variable to swap into different pages. This is something undesirable, so we want to introduce React Router to our application so we can swap different pages as we can see in our demo. So for example, this is a routes where we can change our routes and we can display different pages. So let's start off by installing React Router. It is the same as npm, where we can just install this directly using npm install react router DOM. So this will install React Router for us. While it's installing, I'm going to go back to the slides. So in React Router, we can define a router in our application and a switch. So basically, what we want is we want to use the React Router function to create different pages using the switch function. So for example, we can have an about page that is linked to an about component and a user page that's linked to a user component. It's going to take a while to install. So first things first, I'm going to import React Router. Today we're going to use a hash router just for easier use, hash router as router. And we're going to import a switch. And I believe we need to import one more thing, which is root. From React Router DOM. And then we're going to replace our div with a router and a switch. Instead, we're going to have routes in between. So for example, our main root, I believe its path is equal to our main root. And we'll just set a component which is equal to home. And just make stuff more clean, I'm going to just remove the end. And we'll just do this for different pages. I'm going to just copy this and create 3 pages, which is summary and vote. Let's just give this summary and vote. And we'll just delete this. Cool, now we have a router. Let's go, since I haven't run this, let's just run our front end. So as you can see, if we go through the summaries route, it should go to the summary component, and the vote route, we should go to the root component. Should be running. This is the wrong route, so I'll just open this up. That took a while. And now we'll notice this should be the home page. It's a bit slow. We'll just wait for a sec. This is really slow. Cool, now we've ran this on. Okay, I'm gonna just go back to our original app because I think I did something wrong with the folder. So I'm gonna just open Swiper from desktop. And sorry about this. This is just a bit of technical difficulty. As usual, we'll just copy this. And app.js, paste it in. Cool. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Yeah, we'll just use a different port. Cool, now we have a route where we can type in summary, and this should go to the summary page. And if we type in vote, this should go to the vote page. Now we've implemented routes. You'll notice that it's a switch. So for example, if I accidentally put the first one on the very top, it would result in every single route to be equal to that page. So for example, we go back to summary, this will still be the home page. It's because in React Router, it's a switch. So it's like an if statement where it checks the first path. And if the first path is equal to a route, it would show up the first component. And then if not, it would check for the next path and the next path and so on. So we'll just delete home. Cool, now you'll notice in our demo, we've introduced some sort of code at the end of the route. To introduce this, we want to use something called okay, back something called parameters. So to use parameters, we want to we use a spatial column and write code. And for vote, so we'll just copy summary down a bit because we want to use stats.code, and the other one should be code. And that's vote. I went the other way around. So now with code, the cool thing is we can grab code from the place. So using React hooks, we can use constant code, which equals use params. And that we need to import from React router. And using use code, we can just console log the code out, and we'll be able to see the code would appear. Example, we go to the summary page, which is stats right now, and we can type in a random code. And the random code would show up as in our log, which is random. So that's a basic way we can grab the current routes that we have. So now back to the home page, we notice that we have a button called Create Poll. When we click this Create Poll, we want to switch into a different route. So to do this, we're going to use history. In here, we're going to use constant history equals use history. And then we need to import React router again. And then using history, when we handle onClick for our final button, we can add a new thing, which is history.push, and we can give it a route. For example, let's go, that's not supposed to happen. We can change this route into our vote page, which is vote. And I forgot to add curly brackets between this because we're actually calling a function. And then we can push votes. I think I put this in the wrong place. So we'll just drag this down into the other button, which is this button, create button. So on click, we want to change the route into history.push and vote. So now using that button, when we click create poll, we can change the route into vote. And we want to, back to the main page, we have the routes, we have a vote code. So basically, our current code is vote. Sorry, guys, for doing such a bad presentation. I just kind of got into a technical difficulty. I'm going to try to go back on track. So back to the slides, something I didn't mention about React Router is that React doesn't refresh the page when we change routes. Like normally when you change pages, you think that the browser would refresh to that page. Instead, it keeps the state of the page and checks the route through the switch and see that if the switch is changed, and using JavaScript, it could change the page based on the route. And then to history, this is basically we're changing the path of our routes. The reason why it's .push is because our current browser, you notice how when it's actually a stack. So for example, we can press back. When we press the back button, we're removing off the stash, and when we're changing a page, we're adding it on top of the stack. This is a bit of data structure, but it's something cool. So you could use history.back to remove the next page and go back on history. And back to use params, basically we want to use the code to define different lobbies in our app. And after getting code to work, we will get the backend we will set up the backend. The backend is going to take a while. So what we've done is we've created a template on web development web workshop. So you'll see backend and frontend. What we want is we want the backend. So for people who didn't get cloned this repo, we're just going to download the entire repository and just get the backend part and just throw it into our current project. So we'll just paste it in. Cool, now with a backend part, you'll notice that we have a backend folder now. Currently, there's only an index.js. It's a template, so we've set up most of the things you'll require, except we have not done any code in our to-dos. So we've removed all the logic in our backend, which we're going to implement throughout this workshop. So for our backend, we're going to use it to manage our lobbies. So there's mainly 3 different things we need to implement, which is create lobbies, update vote count, and get all the vote count. So for anyone who didn't have this, if you can't find the GitHub repo or can't download this, feel free to put your hands up and get a dev member to help you out. Otherwise, we're going to move on to implementation. Cool. Now we're going to talk about REST APIs. So basically, our backend needs to communicate with our front end. The way to communicate backend and front end is we're going to use something called REST APIs. In this workshop, I'm not going to explain too much about REST APIs, but the only thing you need to know is that we're going to use 2 methods, which is get and post. So for get, we are requesting the data from a specific resource. So for example, we're going to get the vote counts from our lobby, which is our resource. And for post, we're going to send the data back to the server for creating or updating a resource. So in our app, we will be creating a lobby and also updating the lobby's vote count. Cool. So something we're going to use, we're going to start implementing these methods. So back to the lobby. Currently, we're not going to use any database. So we're going to store everything inside JavaScript. So first things first, we're going to create lobbies and define that as an object. This is where we're going to store all our lobbies. So to store our lobbies, we want a data structure that allows us to store every lobby inside lobbies, and we can browse them easily. So what we're going to do is we want to set up a lobby such as using a code, like, for example, ABCD. We can set up a lobby with an object. So this is a key and value data structure. So for example, in a lobby, we want to have a question. So for example, my question. And inside my question, we're going to have different options that the user can choose, which is an array of options. Let's just give it 1, 2, and 3. Under our options, we need to have a vote count. We'll just call it results. So instead of the results, we want to copy what the data structure we have inside our summary page. So for example, in our summary page, we'll notice we're using something similar, which is name and vote. So this is going to be an array of name, which is 1, and name is a string, yep, and votes. And we'll just give that a count of 0. And we need 3 of them since we have 3 options. And 1, 2, and 3. Cool, now we have a single lobby. To create multiple lobbies, we just have to duplicate a lobby to the very end of our project, which is here. And you can define a different code, for example, D. And therefore, we have 2 lobbies. This is the data structure we're going to store all our lobbies in. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a method to create the data structure for our lobby. So to do this, we're going to have a request of a body. So to receive data from a post, we need to do request.body. This body is whatever data that is sent by the user through the post request. So for example, what we need in our post request will be questions and options. Since to create a lobby, the user must give me a question and a bunch of options. And after being able to get questions and options, we want to also generate a random lobby code, which we have a very great function for us to generate a lobby code. So we'll just do constant code equals, we'll just call this function to generate our code. And now we want to append this new question and options and code into our lobbies. So to do this, we want to change the key value, for example, code. And this will mean the code, we'll just create a new object that is using in the lobby with the value of code, or the key of code, I mean. And we'll set that key value into an object, which will be an exact duplicate of the lobby. So for example, we want to set the question as question and options as options. However, we don't have results. So how do we get this data structure? We're going to use map again. So this will be options.map, and we'll just call an object, arrow function, and it's going to be, we're going to return an object that has a name of option and a vote of 0, since the initial vote count is 0. And now we've created a lobby. We need to return to the user the lobby code. So what we're going to do is we're going to use res.send and send back the lobby code. So now with a basic implementation of a post endpoint, we want to test it out. So what people do to test our REST APIs is we use a REST API client. So for example, I'm going to use Insomnia to test out our REST API. So first, let's run our backend. So we're going to just cd into backend and npm start. I haven't installed it, so I'm going to do npm install first to install all my dependencies. After installing all my dependencies, I can run my application, my backend. Currently, we have nodemon installed, so this will hot reload for you. So for example, if I make a change in my code, it would automatically restart the application. So you don't have to restart it yourself manually, just like React. So for example, this app is running on port 3001. We can access, let's create a new request. We're going to say create lobby. And then we can write in just localhost, because we're running it locally. And we can send in create. So since this is a post method, we're going to use post, and we're going to have a JSON body where we post in question, which is my question. And we can post in a simple options, which is, we'll just do an empty array for now. And this will return me a lobby code. So for example, this is my lobby code. And to prove that we're actually creating a new lobby, I'm just going to console log out the lobby. And we can just resend this, create a new lobby, and we'll notice that the lobby that we created is right here, and we have my question, options, and results. So let's just add in an option to see if our map works. So we'll just call it 1. So if we send that in, that will create a new request, which has an option of 1 with an object as results. So cool. So our create lobby now works. So the next thing we want to implement is post code. what this post code do is we want to post the vote count to the user so we can increment the vote. So right now, we're going to post an option that the user chooses from the list.body. And also, we want to, using this option, we want to increment our vote count, which is right here. So to do this, we will go through all the lobbies. For example, lobbies. .map. So we're just using map to iterate through all our lobbies. Map, and we're going to just say lobby and arrow function. Why this should be lowercase? That is lowercase. And then after looping through our lobby, if the lobby's name is equal to the option that I selected, I want to increment my lobby's vote count. And we'll just use ++ to increment our lobby. So that will increment our lobby. However, we don't need to return anything because we don't have any data to return. So that part is done. Cool. We also have code, which we need to express. So for example, code is a parameter. So we need to grab the code of the lobby. To grab the code of the lobby, we can do code equals res.params. This is very similar to React roots, but we'll now get a code. So if the lobby code is equal to the lobby.options, so this will be options. That's much better. So we're grabbing the lobby's code to grab the correct lobby, and then we loop through the options and find the correct option. I'll just call this O because it's much simpler. Or it's going to be duplicates of variable names. So therefore, we can call name, and if name is equal to the option, we'll just increment the vote. So cool, back to get code. What we want to do this is we want to return all the data about a single lobby. So the same things first, we're going to get the code. And then we will send back the lobby. Cool. However, it is possible that lobby doesn't exist, so we can just check if the lobby exists. So if the lobby doesn't exist, it is equal undefined. We can send a set status back saying it's not found, which is 4, for example. And then to make sure we send the status, we need to return, or else it will send twice. So cool, let's test out our backend. So back to here. Let's try create a new lobby. For example, we'll create a new lobby, and we have a new code. And let's create a new request, which we will ask for get lobby. I'll just say get lobby. So we'll just type in localhost 3001 and just type in the code. And this will get us our lobby, which we can see here, which is basically what we just sent through create lobby. And to test if we can increment the vote, let's just create another request called post vote. And this will be a lobby code. And the body we want is JSON and options. I need to make sure it's quotation marked. And option is 1. So this should increment our vote. This is get. I need to change this into post so I can send my data. And there, I think I need to send back a data for this. Let's just check out the terminal first before. And go to bash. And that's just return a value just in case. Send status 200. So 200 means OK in HTML terms. So for example, we'll create a lobby, grab the code, paste it in, and says OK. And then we can grab data back. this should increment. Apparently it doesn't, so we're going to try debug this. If name is code options dot options dot map o and o equals name option. I'll just console log out the increase. I'll just console out log o. We'll just debug this. Create lobby, create a copy code, paste it in, send, and it says OK. And it does not log this. Interesting. So since I did a mistake, I'm going to just go through back to my notes and see if I did something wrong here. So all the backend is actually implemented in the documentation. So you can just copy directly in from the documentation if you feel like it. So for example, it's an item. Oh, so apparently it's not options, it's results, because I typed the wrong variable. So this is results. So that should work now. So let's just test this out. So we'll create it, post the vote, and then get the lobby. And now we'll see the vote increases. So for example, we can vote again, and the vote should increase. So this is the general backend implementation where we're going to connect everything to the front end. So cool, we're going to connect everything to the front end using a library called Axios. So we'll just install that in our front end first. So back to our front end. So where do we need to access the REST API? We need to post when we create a new app, new lobby. So what we're going to do is let's first create a new function called handle submit. So using handle submit, we will create a new function at the very top. Which is an arrow function. And at the end of the arrow function, we want to push the history into our code, which would be code. But we don't have the code yet. So to access the code, we could use Axios .post. And we need to post an URL, which have been shown multiple times, which is localhost 3001. Too many zeros. And create. And we need to give this a data. So for example, our data will be question, which is question, and options will be options. Axios isn't imported, so let's just import that at the very top. And we're going to use a len function to get the result, which is result arrow function. Our result will be result.data, and therefore that's our code. Just copy that, make sure everything looks great. And since this is a HTTP post call, REST API call, it is possible that our server isn't running and it can't reach it. So we need to add a catch function at the very end to catch all errors that occur. So if it causes an error, we're just going to alert the user about the error. Cool. Now we have a create function inside our REST API, inside our web app, where it calls create and creates a question and an option, creating a lobby using a question and an option, and also gets the result back, which is the code, and pushes the root/code, which is basically our lobby code, and will go to our vote page. So now to the vote page, we want to add in a method to be able to send votes. So if we go back to Tinder card, I'll just search it up, which is the first one. Great. Well, notice we need to add a handler when the user submits a card, which is on swipe. So for example, let's just copy on swipe. I'll paste on swipe. And we need to define a function for on swipe. Constant on swipe is now a function. And we have a parameter, as we can see in the documentation, as a direction. So we'll just copy direction. And therefore, we would have a handler for direction. However, we also need option. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function here and also pass in. So the first parameter it will require is direction. And we'll pass in direction and also option, which is O. So O is from the map where we get the option name. And we just pass it into our new function that we created here. So what we can do now is we can now get the option into our onSwipe function. So on our onSwipe function, if the direction is equal to right, we want to post the vote count of our option to our backend. So very similar to this, let's just copy this and paste it in here. Make sure to import Axios. And also history, because we don't need history actually. I just delete this. Since we don't actually receive anything back, we can actually don't need the len function to receive data back. Instead, what we want to post is we want to post an option, which is our selected option, which comes from our onSwipe function. And since now we can handle it's not create, it's actually the code. So we're just adding code here. And also we need to grab the code from the useParam function, which is code is equal to useParam. We need to import this from React Router again. And therefore, we'll be able to post our code, and we'll be able to post our option. So now then, we need to grab all the question and options. If we notice originally, when we get the option, we'll be able to get the question and the option. So instead of post, we want to get. So we will grab this and just paste it. So before we do that, I'm going to introduce something called useEffect. So in React, there's something called useEffect, which is a function that you can pass in another function, which will be ran every single time when React re-renders. So for example, I can write useEffect and add a new function. For example, do something here. So React will run this new function every single time when the page re-renders. For example, as we know that when we use state, the page will refresh every single time when we change the state. So if we add something here, this will be ran every time we set a state into a different value. So to more about useEffect, for the second parameter, you can also pass in an array of dependencies. So for example, useEffect here, this will only call fetch data when the dependency changes. So an example of a dependency will be a state. So whenever the page refreshes and use term changes, I will fetch more data when the search term changes. We can also define the second variable as empty. This means this function will only be ran when the component loads or loads for the first time. So in here, we want to use effect to be able to load all our question and options. we do not want to load the question and options every single time when the component re-renders. So we're going to use effects and auto import. So this will import use effect from React. And we'll define a function and also an empty dependency array. So inside our use effect function, we want to call axios.get and just grab the code and be able to get all of this. So I'll do then.res, and res.data would be all the data we have. And instead of this, we're going to use state to give a lobby, and we'll set lobby. So this is all the data from the lobby. Let's import that. And this will be, let's just call this an empty, let's call this no first. So since when it loads, it actually has 0 data. So to replace these, we need to go down and find question. So this will become lobby.question, and options will be lobby.options. So let's just delete this because we no longer need this. And back to here, we need to set the data. We need to set lobby into whatever data that comes back. And as usual, we want to catch the errors if there is any. So for example, an error can occur if the lobby doesn't exist. So what we want to do is we want to alert the user that there is an error. And if there is an error, the user shouldn't be on this page. So we'll just use constant history equals use history. And we'll import them from React Router. Use history, well, we'll push the user back into the root directory because they have, for example, a wrong lobby code. So cool, let's try out the web page. Now in here, Swipe app, we can create a question. So food, and let's just write in a single option for now. And let's create a poll. So question is no. What does that mean? It means, for example, if we look here, it's already set the lobby code into the lobby. But as we know that we initialize set lobby as no. So therefore, when we run lobby.question, this equals no. And will give me an error because this doesn't exist. So a hotfix for this is just to add a lovely question mark right underneath. So this will solve our problem here. And if we run this, it would now appear. The question is no. Let me just refresh this page, and then it solves our problem. So cool, now we have BK. So for example, when we swipe this, this should send an API request to our backend, if I am correct. So it just send a request to our backend. So to view the data, we want to, in summary page, we want to get the data. So we're just copying this because this is exactly what we need. And we'll jump to summary and just paste it in. And here we also want to have a lobby and set lobby equal to use state. And this will be no, for example. And and we need to import all of this. Let me just import this. And Axios, I just had to import it manually because. And then we can now use lobby instead of options. So I just remove this and just scroll all the way down. This will be lobby.options. Since it's no, you can also add a question mark here. So just to explain further, the question mark means if it's no, it will return no. And if it's not no, it will return options. So cool, and now we can check out the page. So that failed to compile because there's a history, and I haven't imported history. So let's just import history. history and cool, this should work now. So now we can go to the stats page with the thing, and we can now view the stats page, and we can see the number of votes. So apparently, something is different. So options, instead of options, we want results. So back to this page, it will display the result of BK equals 1. We have several more minutes, so I'm going to just get through this really fast. So for example, BK, and we can vote again, and copying this, and we can paste the lobby code. I'm using the wrong URL. It should be 3000. And then we can vote again. However, you'll notice that this doesn't update. But if we refresh the page, it would update. So to make it auto-update, we're going to introduce something really cool called Websockets. So what is Websockets? It is a communication protocol that allows the server and client be able to send data between them. So it is a two-way communication between browser and server. We use this protocol to create real-time applications. So for example, we want this to update real-time. So to help us implement WebSocket into our application, we're going to use Socketio. It is built upon WebSockets, but it includes features such as event-based communication, broadcasting, and auto-fallback. Auto-fallback just means if it disconnects, it can auto-reconnect. So to do this, I'm going to do this really fast. So instead of typing stuff, I'm going to just copy in our section. So if you've noticed that we've actually not have that much time, so it's actually more of a time thing, where if we have time, we'll just show this to you guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a new connection handler for connection. So this will be in our backend. And if we see, we'll see that we'll create an IO at the very top. We'll just create a new handler for it, which is IO connection, socket, and query, handshake query. So basically what this does is when the user connects to our WebSocket, it would call an event called connection. And using the connection event, I'm going to use the handshake query to get the code from the user. So the lobby code of the user. So in Socketio, there's a concept of rooms. So what rooms are in Socketio is that Socketio can allow users to join different rooms. And in different rooms, users can send messages to everyone in that certain room. So in our Socketio backend, we want to use socket.join to let the user join a certain room called code, which is our lobby code. And then back to React. So as you can know, this is our code postcode, which is our voting endpoint. We want to emit to the Socketio lobby so we're going to use io.to and use code, which is our lobby code. And we're going to emit data to the entire lobby and to the entire room about there's new data, which is we're going to just upload all the lobby data to the room. So it's just a single line that we can add into our code thing. So we'll just add it right at the end. So that is basically what you need to do for the back end. And for the front end, we want the page to reload every single time where Socketio joins. So we'll just copy this new function and paste it into our vote summary page where we want it to auto-refresh. So we're just pasting it in. Something we need to do is we need to install Socketio. I believe it is not here, so I'm going to just do it for you. Socketio. And if we go to Socketio's website and we click on Learn Client Side, we can install this really cool protocol called require socketio.client. We're running out of time, but bear with me. We're going to just install this real quick. And then as we can see in the Socketio documentation, we need to import IO. So we'll just import IO. And now if we look at, so this function, what this does is it connects to our Socketio endpoint through 3001, which is our WebSocket connection. And it uses the query method to send the code to the backend. So the backend would know which lobby you're from. And then what we want to do is we want to use Socketio. So on data, for example, as we can see in the backend, we're emitting an event called data. So on the front end, we need to listen to an event called data to update the lobby. So instead of set data, we want to use set lobby. So now that's basically Socketio all implemented. So if we go back to our front end, you'll notice that let's just create a new socket question. So I'll just type question, and I'll do 1 and 2. So we have 2 options. We can create a poll, and we'll just copy the lobby code and go to localhost 3000 and 3000 over hash root, and go to that lobby, and we need to type in stats. And then we'll see 2 options. And when we drag this, this should automatically update using Socketio. So I'll just make this more clear. We can drag this, and it would automatically update. And we can have multiple users updating the vote count in different accounts. So apparently, and then you can write no for no, and this will automatically update using Socketio. So this will conclude my section. I'm going to let Alan talk about, we have more prizes and questions for you guys to answer.
So I know it's already 8 and everyone wants to go.